On December 21st, 1988, a truck driver was making his way down a lonely stretch of road near Millwood, Georgia. It was the kind of road that most people only used when they had to. Narrow, overgrown, flanked by pine trees so thick they swallowed the daylight. And on the shoulder, half buried in weeds and scattered garbage, something caught his eye. An old television console, the kind that used to sit in living rooms across America. Heavy, wooden, completely out of place on the side of the road. But this was an area known for illegal dumping, so at first, he thought nothing of it. Just another piece of junk someone did not want to haul to the landfill. But something about it unsettled him. Maybe it was the weight of it. Maybe it was the smell. Whatever it was, he called it in, and within hours, investigators from the Ware County Sheriff's Office were standing on that same stretch of road, staring at the same console, with the same bad feeling crawling up their spines. When they pried it open, what they found inside would haunt that community for the next 35 years. Inside the television cabinet was a black suitcase. Inside the suitcase was a duffel bag packed in concrete. And inside the duffel bag, wrapped in a blanket, were the decomposed remains of a small child, a little girl. She was black. She was estimated to be between 3 and 5 years old. She was wearing a white knit pullover with a small red pony on the front, and she had been dead for at least 1 to 2 months before anyone found her. No one knew her name. No one had reported her missing. No one, it seemed, had been looking for her at all. The discovery shook the small community of Millwood to its core. This was rural southeast Georgia, a place where people knew their neighbors, where doors were left unlocked and children played in the yards until the streetlights came on. The idea that someone had driven out here to this forgotten stretch of road and left the body of a child like it was nothing more than an old appliance, it was almost too much to process. Because she was found so close to Christmas, investigators gave her a name, Christmas Doe. Later, she would become known simply as Baby Jane Doe. But for 35 years, the question remained the same. Who was this child? And who had done this to her? The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide. But a cause of death could not be determined. The decomposition was too advanced. The concrete had preserved some of the remains, but destroyed much of the evidence that might have told investigators how she died. All they knew was that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure this child was never found. The body had been wrapped, bagged, encased in concrete, sealed in a suitcase, hidden inside a piece of furniture, and driven to one of the most remote corners of Ware County. This was not an impulsive act. This was methodical, deliberate, and deeply disturbing. The Ware County Sheriff's Office and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation launched a full investigation. They canvassed the area. They followed up on hundreds of tips. They searched missing persons databases across the Southeast, but nothing matched. No one came forward. No family members stepped up to claim the child. It was as though this little girl had simply been erased from existence, and whoever was responsible had done a thorough job of it. The case went cold, not for lack of effort, but for lack of leads. And as the years passed, Baby Jane Doe became one of those cases that investigators could not let go of. Every few years, a new appeal would be made to the public. A new reconstruction of her face would be released. A new story would air on the local news. And every time, the response was the same: silence. But the investigators never stopped working, and neither did the technology. Years turned into decades. Administrations changed. New detectives inherited the case from those who had come before them. But Baby Jane Doe remained a constant. Her file sat in the offices of the Ware County Sheriff's Office and the GBI, a reminder of the one case that refused to be closed. Investigators would sometimes revisit the evidence, turning it over in their minds, wondering what they had missed, wondering if the answer was right in front of them all along. And in a way, it was. The answer had been living in Albany, Georgia, the entire time, just 150 miles away, going about her life as though nothing had happened. In 2019, the GBI began exploring a relatively new tool in forensic science, genome sequencing. The idea was simple in concept, but revolutionary in practice. If they could extract viable DNA from the child's remains and build a genetic profile, they might be able to use genealogy databases to trace her family tree and, ultimately, identify her. In 2020, the GBI partnered with Othram, a private forensic DNA laboratory based in the Woodlands, Texas. Othram specialized in cases exactly like this, cold cases with degraded evidence that traditional DNA testing could not crack. Their scientists used a proprietary technique called forensic-grade genome sequencing to extract and amplify DNA from the child's remains. And it worked. The resulting profile was fed into genealogy databases, and investigators began the painstaking process of building a family tree. Branch by branch, name by name, they identified a cluster of relatives in the Albany, Georgia area, in Dougherty County, more than 150 miles from where the body had been found. But the breakthrough did not come from DNA alone. In 2022, a local news station aired a story marking the anniversary of the child's discovery, and someone was watching. A woman named Teresa Ray, who was a second cousin of a woman named Evelyn Odom. Teresa had a feeling, a suspicion that had been gnawing at her for years. She remembered a little girl in the family, a quiet child, a fragile child, a child who had simply vanished one day, and no one could give her a straight answer about where she had gone. Teresa called the tip line. That call changed everything. It was the kind of moment that investigators dream about. The tip that cracks the case wide open after decades of dead ends. Teresa did not have proof. She did not have evidence. But she had something more powerful than either of those things. She had memory. And memory combined with DNA was all it took. Investigators zeroed in on the Odom family. They located a genetic relative and obtained a DNA sample. The comparison was conclusive. The child found on that roadside near Millwood in 1988 was Kenyatta Odom, nicknamed KeKe. She had been born on August 28, 1983 in Albany, Georgia. She was 5 years old when she died, and she had been murdered by the people who were supposed to protect her. Kenyatta was the daughter of Evelyn Odom. By all accounts, KeKe was a sweet child, quiet, gentle, but she had challenges. She had some developmental delays. Her balance was off. She moved, slowly. And most significantly, she struggled with bladder control. She had frequent accidents, bedwetting, incontinence. The kinds of things that any parent of a young child would recognize. The kinds of things that require patience, understanding, compassion. Kenyatta did not receive any of those things, not from her mother, not from the man who shared their home, not from anyone. What she received instead was something no child should ever have to endure. And the tragedy of Kenyatta's story is not just how she died. It is how she lived. Because the final act of violence that took her life was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a pattern of abuse, neglect, and cruelty that had been building for months, possibly years, in a household where a 5-year-old girl was treated as less than human. Instead, her mother saw her condition as a source of shame, a problem to be punished rather than treated. According to testimony that would later emerge at trial, Evelyn Odom responded to Kenyatta's accidents with escalating cruelty. She would slap her. She would force her to stand in a closet for 30 minutes as punishment, and the abuse only got worse over time. Family members who encountered Kenyatta during this period described a child in visible decline. Ulyster Sanders' niece, Latonya, recalled that KeKe did not speak much. She said the child appeared fragile, that her face was sunken in, and that she was very quiet. Another family member, Jacqueline Pruitt, who was Sanders' sister, was more direct. She said that every time KeKe came over, there was always something wrong with her. She always had a bruise on her, like someone had hit her in the head. She was always hungry, and Jacqueline could not understand why. Pruitt also noticed that KeKe walked with a limp. These were the signs, the bruises, the hunger, the silence, the shrinking body, and the vacant eyes of a child who had learned that drawing attention to herself only brought pain. And yet, no one intervened. No one called the authorities. No one pulled Kenyatta out of that house. And the abuse continued, day after day, until it culminated in the act that ended her life. According to the testimony of Ulyster Sanders, who was Evelyn's live-in boyfriend at the time, the final incident began like so many others. Kenyatta had a bathroom accident. She soiled herself, and Evelyn lost control. She ran a bath. She told Kenyatta to get in, but the water was far too hot, scalding hot, and when Kenyatta stepped into the tub, she began screaming, hollering, the kind of screams that reach through walls and stay with you long after they stop. Sanders testified that he rushed into the bathroom. and what he saw was something no human being should ever have to witness. The top of Kenyatta's foot was blistered. The skin was hanging off. The damage was severe and immediate, the result of water hot enough to cause deep tissue burns within seconds. Sanders begged Evelyn to call the paramedics. He urged her. He pleaded. But Evelyn refused. She told him she was afraid that the authorities would take her children away. And so, instead of getting her dying daughter the medical help she desperately needed, Evelyn pulled Kenyatta from the tub, carried her to the bedroom, and attempted to treat the burns herself. She applied some kind of ointment, possibly a basic antibiotic cream. As though a tube of over-the-counter medicine could undo what boiling water had done to a 5-year-old's body. Think about that for a moment. A 5-year-old child with severe burns covering her feet and legs. Burns that in a hospital would have required immediate treatment, wound care, intravenous fluids, pain management, possibly skin grafts, the kind of injuries that even with the best medical intervention would have taken weeks to heal. And instead she was lying in a bed in a house in Albany, Georgia, with nothing but a tube of ointment and a mother who had caused the injuries in the first place. For 4 to 5 days, Kenyatta lay in that bedroom, suffering, deteriorating. And then one day, Evelyn called Sanders home from work. He walked into the room and found Kenyatta unresponsive. Her face was swollen. Her eyes were puffy and closed. She was gone. Kenyatta Odom was 5 years old, and she had died in the place she should have been safest, in her own home, at the hands of her own mother. But the horror did not end there, because Evelyn Odom did not call the police. She did not call an ambulance. She did not tell a single soul what had happened. Instead, she set about making Kenyatta disappear. She dressed the child's body. She wrapped her in a sheet. She placed her inside a small suitcase, and then inside a duffel bag. Sanders provided concrete, which was poured around the body. The bag was sealed inside a black suitcase and placed inside an old television console. And then, under cover of darkness, they drove more than 150 miles from Albany to Millwood, to one of the most isolated stretches of road in Ware County, and they left her there on the side of the road, like garbage. And then they went home, and they never spoke of it again. When family members asked about Kenyatta, Evelyn had stories ready. She told some people that KeKe had moved to California. She told others that the child was staying with someone named Medea. Different stories for different people, all designed to deflect suspicion and erase the memory of a child who had been inconvenient to her from the beginning. And it worked. For 35 years, it worked. Evelyn Odom continued living in Albany. She went to work. She attended family gatherings. She lived her life as though her daughter had never existed, as though she had not watched that child die in agony on a bed in her own home, as though she had not poured concrete over her body and driven through the Georgia night to leave her on the side of a road in Ware County. 35 years of silence, 35 years of lies, 35 years of a secret so dark that it should have consumed her. But it did not, because Evelyn Odom, by all accounts, carried that secret without visible consequence, without guilt, without remorse, without a single moment of accountability, until Teresa Ray made that phone call. On November 9th, 2023, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation arrested Evelyn Odom, then 56 years old, and Ulyster Sanders, then 61, at their residences in Albany. Both were charged with felony murder, first-degree cruelty to children, aggravated battery, concealing a death, and conspiracy to conceal the death of another person. They were taken into custody without incident. The trial of Evelyn Odom began on August 11th, 2025 in Dougherty County. Ulyster Sanders had already pleaded guilty on August 8th to charges of concealment and agreed to testify against Evelyn. His testimony was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. He described the abuse, the scalding, the days of agony, the death, the concrete, the drive to Millwood, all of it. Family members took the stand as well. They described a child who was wasting away in plain sight. They talked about the bruises, the hunger, the limp, the silence. And they talked about how Evelyn had lied to all of them for decades about what had happened to KeKe. The defense challenged Sanders' credibility. They argued that the prosecution had not met its burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. They even maintained the fiction that Kenyatta had been given to a woman named Medea, a person the prosecution argued had never existed. The courtroom was tense. The evidence was circumstantial in many ways, relying heavily on the testimony of a co-defendant who had his own reasons to shift blame. But the prosecution had built a case that was difficult to dismantle. The DNA was irrefutable, the concealment was undeniable, the lies were documented, and the testimony of family members painted a picture of a household where abuse was not the exception, it was the rule. On August 27th, 2025, after deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Evelyn Odom was found guilty of felony murder, first-degree cruelty to children, conspiracy to commit a crime, and concealing the death of another. She was found not guilty on the aggravated battery charge. She was sentenced to mandatory life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Justice had come. 37 years late, but it had come. The courtroom erupted. Family members wept. Investigators who had worked the case for years embraced one another. For a moment, the weight of 3.5 decades lifted, just enough to let the light in. Kenyatta Odom was 5 years old when she died. She was born on a summer day in 1983, and she should have grown up in the warmth of a family that loved her. She should have gone to school, made friends, learned to ride a bicycle. But instead, she spent her short life in a home where her very existence was treated as a burden, where her struggles were met not with patience, but with punishment, where the people who were supposed to care for her chose cruelty over compassion, and when their cruelty killed her, they chose silence over accountability. For 35 years, Kenyatta had no name. She was Christmas Doe, baby Jane Doe, a case number, a file in a drawer, but she was never forgotten. The investigators who found her on that roadside in 1988 carried her with them. They passed her case from one generation of detectives to the next, each one determined to give her back her name. In the end, they did, with the help of modern science, a courageous tipster, and the kind of dogged persistence that defines the best of law enforcement. Kenyatta Odom was brought home, not to the family that failed her, but to the truth, to justice, to a name on a headstone instead of a number in a file. She deserves so much more than what she got, but at the very least, she is no longer nameless. She is no longer forgotten. She is Kenyatta, KeKe. And her story, as painful as it is to tell, is one that must be told, because the children who cannot speak for themselves need someone to speak for them. And this time, someone finally did.